someone who lives in our hallway is in the last moments of her life, and she just
In
called.
communities?
And yes,
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I just see a message. I just see her name come up. I didn't pick up the phone, but I'm afraid.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I did not know that. Um, I mean, since I don't know whom you're speaking of,
Yeah,
I may have known it, but that, oh my God, that's
she's in hospice.
been in hospice a long time.
I don't know.
Okay.
She's been fighting cancer for a while now.
Oh, I think I know who it is then.
The dogs think that they can have the rest of the dinner. I suppose it could be true.
I wondered why everybody was so quiet, but when we ended the last class, I got a call from my brother and I turned my speaker off. So consequently, I wasn't hearing anything anybody said.
Oh, you were talking about the fact that I think someone in 100 is passing as we speak. No one has disclosed who it is, and other than that, you didn't miss anything.
Okay. Are they passing of the virus or natural?
No, somebody,
No,
one of my neighbors, a neighbor just called me. I saw her name come up in caller ID, and I'm afraid that she's calling to tell me that our other neighbor died.
What
I didn't
floor
pick
are
up
you
the
on?
phone. I didn't pick up the phone because I don't want to know it
What
until after
floor?
this class.
What-
Third floor. I'll just say third floor.
I'm on the 8th floor, so I probably don't know.
I think I saw you downstairs the other day, but we didn't recognize each other with masks on.
Oh, well, now that I look at your hair, you look a lot like Georgia. I might
Yeah,
have
people,
said hi.
everyone says that.
I might have said hi, Georgia, because I saw Georgia from the back.
For
I thought
years,
it was-
everyone called me Janine. We had so many Janines and Jeans, and I don't
How do you
know.
pronounce your name?
Well, it's Jeannie. I'll change it right now. I'm gonna change it right now.
what do you mean? Change what?
Well, because if you can call me Jeannie.
She's
How's that?
correcting her name to more
There you
pronounceable
go. There you go.
pronunciation.
So besides Jody, there's a number of people. Hello, Emma. Is that Emma? No, it's somebody else. Okay. All right. So let me turn this on. All right. So despite the fact that we are so few, I think we'll get started. And
Okay, turn.
all right, so we will try to get started here. And hopefully a few other people will join us. It's a very small group tonight.
Yeah,
Strikes me as odd, but
well, the Republican convention hasn't even started yet, so they're not all locked onto that.
that's right. I mean, out of a perverse fascination, people might want to watch it. I didn't.
I know I'm gonna watch some of it until I can't stand it, or I'm yelling at him all the time.
I mean,
It's like rubbernecking at a terrible accident.
yeah. I
It
mean,
is kind of.
I can't watch political speech in general, so it's I can only read about it afterwards. So it's my I don't know what it is, my heart rate or my discomfort or something. So I just
Well, I watched all of the Democratic convention.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
I
Showed
really
on Channel 2. It was very uplifting.
wish
Yeah.
They're sending out how it was doom and gloom. That was so stupid.
Yeah.
Well,
I really wish I had had the intestinal fortitude to watch it.
it was
But
wonderful.
the so interesting that Conway is now leaving, and I heard today that her daughter is petitioning the court for emancipation.
Wow.
That
Oh,
Something's going on in that family. They must have been in quite a lot of turmoil for the last 4 years.
You can imagine being a kid in that family.
And the husband is leaving the Lincoln Project
Yeah.
too.
That's sad. That's too bad.
I feel like he is really not a very nice man. That is my. I mean, she is obviously a psychopath.
Really?
Why do you say that?
I'm sorry.
Why do you say that?
Right, Kellyanne Conway.
No, who's the second?
Kellyanne Conway is the one who came up with this idea of alternative facts.
Yeah.
She's the one who sort of made it okay somehow for people to say something that was baldly untrue.
I thought
Did you
Trump-
say that her husband was not a nice man?
Yeah, I think he's not a nice man, interpersonally. I don't think he is the same kind of, sociopath that she is, but I think that he's not a nice man. I don't think that
He's working against Trump in this Lincoln Project, though.
Say it again?
He has been working in this Lincoln Project, which is against Trump.
Right, but as whatever I felt about my wife's boss, I would feel like I would either have to support her, or I would have to be honest and, divorce her and then work against her boss. It just feels like there must be so much poison in the household for that situation.
Got 4 teenage and preteen children. So
Say it again, Ann.
they have 4 children that are teenagers and preteens, so they're high school and pre-high school. I got the impression from what you said.
15-year-olds to say that she wants to be emancipated from her parents, that is pretty radical.
Maybe she's a Democrat.
Right, I think she is. Oh my gosh. The American family, this is where we're at. All right. So today, reading this, I was just completely blown away by the power and the genius of this writer. Just his unbelievably powerful evocation of a ruler sort of just going rails. It's just and the degree to which he has people helping him who range from Nathan, who is willing to tell him how terrible his behavior is, right, to Joab, right, who sort of recognizes that his terrible behavior is terrible, but it's also incompetent, and so he shifts things around in order to make it possible for the murder of Uriah to happen.
It's also a political opportunity for him.
Of course, absolutely, right. Joab definitely seems, right, to be able to recognize that his boss's unhinged response to this situation, right, is an opportunity for him to perhaps even wrest control. Certainly from the point of view of military. On the other hand, he is enough of a loyal soldier, right, to say to David, you better get here now, before I fully conquer this city, because if you don't get here in time, what's going to happen, right? You are going to give
The obsolete.
right? And this is very interesting. This business of giving up glory is a really fascinating topic in the Bible. both in terms of what Joab's communication with David is, with Abimelech is killed by a woman, God forbid, right? But also in the book of Judges, where we have Barak, right? Is it Barak? Is that his name? I think it might be Barak. Yeah. Who won't go to attack an enemy unless Devorah, the prophet, comes with him, and she says to him, if I come along, then I get the glory and you don't, right? Because if you bring a woman along, you will not get the glory. And Barak is like, I don't care, so he's like strikes a feminist blow, early on, right? He's like, I don't care if I don't get the glory, like, go ahead and take the glory. I want to ensure the victory. So if, you can sort of imagine that if Joab had not done that, right, had he not called David and said, get here really quickly, right, then he would have inherited all of the glory. What his thinking about that is an interesting question. All right, so so last week we had questions, right? So Jeannie was interested in who is Bathsheba and who is Uriah the Hittite, and was talking about the underground cities of the Hittites. Right? Dodi was thinking of, well, is Bathsheba a special case? Which I think, based on chapter 13, right, where Amnon becomes obsessed with his half-sister Tamar, right, it seems actually unlikely that Bathsheba is a special case. And Betsy wanted to know, I can't quite read my handwriting here, but David
why he murdered Uriah rather than do something that was politically
right. So was it preventable? Right? Could he have done something else, or was it actually necessary to kill Uriah? And again, I think there is a way in which I don't have an answer to that question, but I do think, right, that there's a way in which this chapter is demonstrating that David has gone cold, right?
What about divorce? What about David and Michal? She was sent to him, then she sent to somebody else, and she comes back to him. Death wasn't necessary, right? There was a divorce or something.
I mean, I think it was necessary from a political point of view. I mean, what do I know, right? But
Hypothetically.
yeah, David, I think, felt that it was necessary, right, to assert that Saul had given David his daughter in marriage, right? That Saul saw David in a way, right, as a kind of successor, and it was very necessary to enforce that, right, and to underscore that, right? Bathsheba is nobody, right? I mean, I think that's the first answer to your question, Gene. Right? Is Bathsheba, as far as we know, is just a woman, right? A beautiful one, to be sure, right? But she's the wife of a loyal soldier and the daughter of Eliam. And it's not even clear, at least to me, I mean, it might be clear to other people, it's not clear to me who Eliam is. Right? So Michal is the daughter of the king. Like, that's a thing. Right? Whereas Bathsheba is the daughter of somebody, but she's mostly the wife of a loyal soldier.
But if her husband is a nobody, he's a soldier, okay. But if he's not that,
he's a distinguished warrior.
Okay, well, why can't they just get a divorce? Because Michal left David and went back to her first husband, but she had another husband, right?
Work the other way. I think Michal was first married to David, and when David was in his outlaw period, right? Michal was then given by Saul to another man, right?
And then she came back.
And then David sort of asserted his, right to Michal.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we're just arguing hypothetically, but I don't, I don't see why he had to kill Uriah, since this is precedent for
But
back
Jean,
and forth.
you're not arguing a technicality at all. I think you're arguing the main point, right? Which is that the king's sin of sleeping with the soldier's wife, right, was, it's a sin. It's not a good thing, right? By any stretch of the imagination. But I think that,
It's a couple of commandments, as you said, a couple of the 10 commandments.
right. Oh no, I mean it's a bad thing, right? But it's pretty clear based on the narrative, right? That God doesn't really lose God's patience with David, right? Until David kills Uriah, right? That it's when it's sort of like with Nixon, right? Or even to a certain extent Trump, right? It's not the crime, it's the cover-up, right? It's the problem here is not necessarily that he slept with Bathsheba, right? But that his efforts to conceal it, right, and to sort of justify it, right, lead to so much violence, and to so much unnecessary suffering. So anyway, so let's look at chapter 11, because I just thought that chapter 11 was amazing. We've already spoken, right, about the fact that David now, as Alter says, has become a sedentary king, right? He sits in his palace, right? Literally, the verb is yoshev, right? He is sitting in Jerusalem. He sits there while he sends other people to do what he wants them to do. Right? And then we also talked, I think, last week about the fact that it happened at eventide, right? It happened close to the end of the day, right, when David got up from bed, meaning he had taken a very long nap, right? That he's mostly happy at this point to let Joab do the military stuff, and he's happy to sit in bed and lie around and maybe visit a wife from time to time. But he gets up and he looks down, and what does he see? He sees Bathsheba, right? And since he's the king, he feels like he can ask who it is and have that person sent, right, up to him, right? And we talked also last time in this very, very interesting way, right, that she is in unusual fashion, right, identified both by her father and her husband, right? Not entirely clear why that is, right? But very interesting, right, that on the top of page 251, David sent messengers and fetched her, right? But instead of him coming to her, right, which is an idiom for sexual activity, right? She came to him, right? It gives her an active role in this.
She was fetched.
I'm sorry?
She was fetched by messengers.
Right, she was fetched, but then she came, right? Which is
You have a choice if the king sends messengers to get you. to fetch you?
That's actually a really interesting question, right? Because
Brought to him.
I think the typical sequence of verbs would be David sent messengers and fetched her, and they brought her, right? And he lay with her, right? So that I think typically the woman in this situation would be the passive object, right, of all of the verbs. But here, right, there is this odd hint that she is the active subject of one of these verbs. And he says,
Say that, I don't know if I agree with it.
yeah, go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree that she's active. You know, she was told to come to the king.
Right. I don't mean active in I don't mean active in a psychological sense. I mean active in a grammatical.
They have walked on her own 2 feet.
Right. Right.
But I think what Ann and I are both saying is, what choice did she have?
Right. I mean, right. So there is. I mean, I think that's a completely reasonable argument, and I also think, right, that it's possible. I'm not going to put all my weight on this because I think I'll fall through, right? But it is possible, right, that what the narrator is doing, right, is hinting that there was a recognition by Bathsheba that this was an opportunity, right? That she could upgrade her situation, right? She could move from Uriah, the loyal soldier, who is always on the front, right, and always away, and she could conceivably upgrade the husband to the king, right? And the fact of the matter is that, ultimately, right, what is Bathsheba? Bathsheba is known for 2 things, right? She's known for being the beautiful woman who attracted David and got him into so much trouble, right? So the classic femme fatale role. And she's also known, right, as the mother of David's heir, Solomon, right?
Very pushy about it.
Say it again, Betsy?
She's very pushy about it.
And in that context, right, as we will see later, right, we'll see in the first 2 chapters of the Book of Kings, right, we'll see that Bathsheba is in no way a passive and retiring woman, right? So the question is, I mean, and obviously people change. I'm not saying that so maybe we could even say, right, that this is not about who Bathsheba is now. Like, probably she was, led into this.
I think it's unfair to infer into this,
Right.
that she's ambitious and so she goes. What if she said, no, I'm not going?
But I mean, that's a really interesting question, right?
But there is an inference. That's the point. In the text, there is an inference. It's not conclusive, but he's pointing it out.
Right. I mean, it's not conclusive. But I do think, it's an interesting question. What would have happened had Bathsheba refused? Right? What would have happened to Bathsheba is not the interesting question. Right? But I do think that the interesting question is that if Bathsheba had refused to go, right, the story would have been stuck. Right? There would have not been an heir that God would have found acceptable for David.
I think it's quite possible when the king calls for her, she says, wow, the king is calling for me.
Right.
It's possible. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
She's taking an active role, and I'm just saying, well,
and again,
she says, no, I'm sticking with my husband, and to hell with the king.
right. And I think that it's interesting, right? Like even if and just because Alter makes this business, right, of linking the story of Amnon and Tamar with the story of David and Bathsheba, right, is that we sort of have a sense of what might happen, right, if Bathsheba had refused, right? So it's possible, right, that Bathsheba could have refused and that would have been that, right? But more likely, right, is that Bathsheba would have refused, and then it would not have been a consensual situation.
Doesn't seem like David's the kind of guy that you'd say no to.
Right. I mean, but that's the thing, right? That's the difference between Amnon, right, who's presumably the heir, and David, right? David is the king, and right, you don't say no to the king, even if it means that you are betraying your loyal husband, right? So very, very interesting, right? So, and I think I mentioned last time, right, that I think Alter misses something, right, when he says that that the detail about the mikvah, right, is that Bathsheba could not be pregnant by her husband, right? I mean, that certainly is true. He's not wrong, right? But I think the more important detail, right, is that David is so blinded by his lust, right, that he doesn't recognize, right, that she is at her most fertile moment of the month, right, and so that sex with her now is likely to produce a child, right? And I think and it's an interesting question, right? My sense is that David was not thinking about this, right? He was not thinking about, will I have a child with this woman or not, right? He was thinking only about
Immediate gratification.
Rabbi, we've lost you. You're frozen.
He'll come back.
his desires. I'll come back.
You're back. But what does David do? He goes around.
I'm back. Okay.
What does David do? He goes around taking wives and having children. Be fruitful and multiply. I mean, it doesn't. It's fine with him, isn't it, to have more children?
That's a great question. I hadn't thought of it that way. I mean, certainly that's possible, right? But I think that in every other case when that would happen, right, that the husband would be around, right? And so the wife would go home, and since she had just come out of the mikvah, right, she would sleep with her husband, and then whoever it was who was the father, right, it would be the fatherhood would be attributed to the husband. But with Uriah, since he's not there, and then he stubbornly does not sleep with his wife when he comes home, even though she's fresh out of the mikvah, or maybe by that time she's not. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a very interesting question, right? I mean, the timing here is not entirely clear to me. But the fact that Uriah refuses to sleep with Bathsheba, right? That is actually what causes all of this issue, right? So Uriah came, right, and David asked, "How are things going?" Right, and he said, "Go down to your house," meaning go down to your house, have a bath, have a meal, right, and cohabit with your wife, right? But that didn't happen, right? Uriah stays at the king's house, and then when David realizes that that's happened, right, he actually goes and asks him, right, "Why didn't you go down to your house?" And what I love is that there's this, this sort of scholarly conversation about what does this all mean, right? Does Uriah know what David is up to or not? Right? So there's the sort of two different versions of the story, right? In one version of the story, Uriah is just the loyal soldier, right? Who has no idea what's going on,
Right.
right? But refuses to sleep with his wife on the basis of just this is not what you do, right? When you are an active duty soldier, like you,
Guarding the ark.
right? You come home for whatever reason because the king called you, but you're not going to sleep with your wife. You're going to head back to the, and then there's the other view, right? That somehow Uriah knows the whole time, right? That what David is up to, and the reason he's refusing to sleep with his wife, right, is through the need to sort of make sure that David owns his guilt, right? And
And then there's the view that on the first night he doesn't know, but then
Right.
he finds out.
right, I love that actually both of them can be true, right? Because he comes home, right, doesn't sleep with his wife because that's not what a soldier does, right? And when David is so freaked out about it, he's like, "Wait, there's something going on here," right? And then at that point, right, he is going to say, whatever's going to happen to me. At this point, if David has slept with my wife, my life is forfeit anyway, right?
Yeah,
I'm not gonna let him off the hook.
yeah, right.
Wants him to get caught.
Right. I mean, he wants,
He doesn't know his wife is pregnant. He doesn't know his wife is pregnant, but
it's clear that Uriah even sees Bathsheba, right? It's not even clear that they speak at all.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I'm not saying they don't at all, but it's not clear to me that they do, right? There's no
She doesn't know she's pregnant even.
well, right. I mean, that's my assumption. Is the only way that he would know that she was pregnant, right, would be because he infers it from David's own behavior, right? That David's behavior is so suspicious to this straight shooter that he's like, something's going on, and I'm not going to fall for it, whatever it is, right? And so.
and he knows that he's gonna it's over for him anyway.
Right, exactly. And what I
He
find
comes out looking like a hero.
is that David gets him drunk, right, which seems to be completely transparent, right? And then David gives him a letter to Joab, which also seems completely transparent,
Right.
right? And so and what does David's letter say? This is a part of the story that until I read it, this time round, I had never picked up on, right? It says, put Uriah in the face of the fiercest battling and draw back so that he will be struck down and die. Right? Basically what David is saying is everybody go up with Uriah, and then, on command, everybody else abandon him to the enemy.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like the sort of baldness of that is actually somewhat shocking.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that you could actually say, like how would that not be obvious to everyone who was participating? Right? That something is up.
Right.
Joab is arranging the death of Uriah by telling everyone else to retreat, so that Uriah is left alone amongst the enemy. Right? So what does Joab do? And this I found completely fascinating. Right? Is that Joab sort of smooths things out for David. Right? And that Joab it's not only Joab who smooths things out, right? It's also It's also the messenger smooths things out
Yeah.
for David.
Right.
And I found that to be amazing, right? Is that there's these, and so what I took, right, was that, and again, it seems so relevant to our situation today, right, in our country, right, where you have this kind of almost bumbling leader who has a goal, right, and he says to his underling, make this happen,
Right.
just a completely crazy and stupid way of
Right.
it's like, get rid of Uriah.
Right. Right.
And so
Right.
Joab comes up with a better way of getting rid of Uriah.
Right.
And Joab is like, I might be in trouble, right? Because I sacrificed
Right.
other guys
Yeah.
for the sake of getting rid of Uriah, and
Yeah.
might lose track of the goal and be mad at me because I made like a rookie error in terms of warfare.
Right.
And so the messenger saves Joab. I mean, this is what is amazing to me, right? Is that there's these sort of levels of subterfuge,
Right.
right? That that as you go down the ladder, somehow the subterfuge becomes more sophisticated.
The contamination, the corruption.
Yeah, right. And so the sort of simple and almost stupid corruption of David,
Right.
make sure Uriah gets killed by leaving him alone in battle, turns into this very elaborate lie, right?
Right.
Now the Ammonites came out and they chased us, and then we managed to turn the tide of the battle, and so we chased them, and then
Right.
we near the wall, and then the archers shot down the arrows, and Uriah was killed.
Yeah.
And how terrible that David made Uriah the messenger to Joab with the plans for his own death, his own murder.
Right. I mean, the whole thing is so perverse.
Dirty.
Right. It's dirty. It's dirty. And this is what I find fascinating about this narrative. Right. Is that this is King David. Right. This is the hero of the Jews. Right. When we sing about a king, we don't sing about Solomon. Right? We sing David, Melech Yisrael, Chai, Vika. We sing David, the King of Israel, who will, be alive and established for all time. Right? That and this is the guy.
Yeah.
So many Jews and Christians name and I've said this many times, name their children after biblical characters, and particularly David is a popular name.
I have one.
What'd you say?
I have a David.
You have a David.
I have a nephew, David. I mean,
So do people really research the name and find out all the ins and outs of this story? So
I do think that that's what's really interesting, is that I think that when people read the Bible, right, people don't so often read it the way we're reading it.
they don't read it at all, maybe.
Right. They read it, I think, I knew, yes, I did know, right, that David sent Uriah to the front to get killed, right? But I've never read this narrative with this kind of commentary, right, that demonstrated to me, right, that David's clumsy recommendation for getting Uriah killed was rejected by Joab, and then Joab makes it a little bit more complicated, and then gives instructions to the messenger about how to tell David about it, and then the messenger, on his own accord, right, changes the story to make sure that he doesn't get killed, right? I mean, it's this amazing, as Betsy put it, right? It's like this amazing contagion of corruption, right?
Worse. It gets a lot worse.
Oh, it's going to get a lot worse, right? This is just the first, right? This is just the first salvo right, in the badness. This is the, as Betsy I think put it, right, this is the turning point, right? This is the moment where David loses what David had, right? And what I find so interesting about it, and we'll see this in a future chapter, I don't know if we'll get to it tonight, but what I find so fascinating about it, right, is that the result ultimately, right, will be the death of David and Bathsheba's first child, right, and the birth of Solomon. And Solomon, right, in the way that David kind of replaced Saul, it feels like here we have this moment where Solomon replaces David, right?
God loves him.
Right, and unlike David, right, God does not say, "Oh, okay, Solomon is now the king, and we're going to get rid of David." Right? He says David's going to live out his days. I mean, it almost feels cruel, right? Given how much David suffers for the rest of his life, right? But it's so interesting to me that there's this obvious changing of the guard, right at this moment, right? So, all right, so anyway, David hears the news from the messenger, and he offers this sort of, ridiculous bromide, I think is the word that Alter uses, right? Oh, don't let it seem so bad, right? That Uriah and the others died because, sometimes things go well. It's basically like you lose some, you win some, you lose some, right? This is on page 255, right? And so just keep on going, right? But hold on one second. I got to plug in my computer before it dies. So on page 256, right, and Uriah's wife, right, very interesting, right? She's not Bathsheba here, right? She's not, the consort of David, right? She's Uriah's wife. I find that so powerful, right? Heard that Uriah, her man. It's like knife thrusts into David's reputation, right? That, despite the fact that we can debate, like, was she ambitious, was she not ambitious? Whatever you may say about her, right, is that Uriah was her husband and Uriah was her man, right? I mean, like, both of them. Right?
And here we find out something about her emotion, which we have not heard about before, that she keened and she mourned.
Right. Right. And then David, Alter then compares her negatively to Gertrude, right, from Hamlet, right, by saying that, as soon as the mourning was over, she went into David's house and became his wife, right? Although then he has to acknowledge, well, it might be a good idea for her to do that before she ends up with a belly, right? Before she's visibly pregnant, it's important to make sure that David has taken her as one of his wives.
And again, what choice does she have?
None. I think at this point she has none, right? And she bore him a son, and it's very interesting, right? It's only when the son comes along, right, that we finally get this phrase, right? And the thing that David had done. I mean, I don't even know how you say the thing, right? I mean, there's so many things that he has done in this chapter, right? And the thing that David had done was evil in the eyes of Hashem, right? That God does not approve of David's behavior. And I think it's like the first time, right? David has done some really questionable things over the course of his previous career, but none of them has received the, this sort of, that it was evil in the eyes of God, right? So it does raise the question, what was the determining factor, right? Is it the collection of all of these things, right? Is it the murder? Is it the adultery? Right? It's not 100% clear, right, what it is. And so we turn to chapter 12 on page 257, right? And we have this amazing story, right? We've met Nathan before, right, very briefly, right? And so we meet him again, and he tells a story. Right? He sort of entraps David. And I thought this was really interesting, right, from the perspective of, like, why would he tell this really, like, obviously a folk story, right? And Alter has the same question, right? And the Lord sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and said, 2 men there were in a single town. One was rich, and the other was poor. The rich man had sheep and cattle in great abundance, and the poor man had nothing save one little ewe that he had bought. And he nurtured her and raised her with him together with his sons. From his crust she would eat, and from his cup she would drink, and in his lap she would lie, and she was like to him like a daughter. And a wayfarer came to the rich man, and it seemed to pity to him to take from his own sheep and cattle to prepare for the traveler. Right? So who is this rich man not like, by the way? Right? Who immediately runs to take a kid from his flock to feed the wayfarers?
David?
Abraham, right? Abraham, right? Abraham is the sort of classic. I'm sorry, Jeannie?
I don't remember. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So Abraham, right? Abraham Abraham is sitting, under his tent, right? And the 3 angels of God come, right? And they're about to announce the birth of Isaac, right? the Annunciation of Isaac, and and even though the rabbis play with it a little bit, but the rabbis say, oh, he had just been circumcised, but the fact that he was still recovering from his circumcision, right? He still jumps up, right, and runs to his wife and says, do this, and he runs to the barn and he gets and here is this guy, right, this rich man, as rich as Abraham, who's like, I'm rich, but I'm not willing to give up one of my own sheep for the sake of this traveler.
Abraham says that?
No, Abraham, on the contrary. What I'm saying is that Abraham is this sort of importance of hospitality.
Right.
Middle Eastern culture comes in part, right, from this sort of model of Abraham as being the uber hospitable person, right?
Right.
And Nathan is basically saying to David, eventually he'll say, like, you're that guy, right? A completely unhospitable guy,
Right.
who not only doesn't want to feed the traveler, you also are going to, like, steal some poor guy's single sheep in order to do it.
Right.
Also, what was interesting to me was this metaphor of the ewe.
Yes.
Well, it was the story described puts the ewe in sort of an exalted position of great affection, where the man is not raising her to eat her, but it seems to have affection. He shares his cup with her, his crust of bread. She sits in his lap. I've never seen this kind of affection for an animal in the Bible.
Jeannie, I'm really happy you said that, because I was, I just wrote that a little essay about dogs, and one of the things that I learned.
What was that?
Did you see I just sent around? I think it was sent around. I don't know. In the center post, did it come around?
I didn't have to look. No, yes, it did come around.
Anyway, I wrote a piece about my dog. One of my dogs got very sick, and I was really worried about him, and so I looked into a little bit, like, the Jewish attitude about pets, right? And by and large, the Talmud is not so positive about having pets. Like if an animal does not provide a material benefit, like a chicken, right, or livestock.
Hello, how are you?
Right, they're not. The Talmud is not super into the idea that you should have pets, right? That are the relationship.
Go-
So here we have. So you're pointing out something really important, right? Is that Nathan is suggesting that at least in the Bible, the idea of having a pet, like this ewe is not a is not going to be food, right? This ewe is a source of companionship and love, right?
And there's no other place anywhere in the Old and New Testament, is there?
I mean I'm not in a position to say, but I think it is fascinating, right? That by and large, I don't think there's a lot of we have Bilam's ass, who shows much more love for Bilam than he shows for her, right? But I'm not sure, right? I don't have off the top of my head any other examples of pets.
Yeah, well, I mean, not that I'm not I'm not very well versed, but I mean, the animal rights people point to the Old Testament for some, they're sort of scrounging for a little evidence that in the Old Testament there are admonitions for that one should not be cruel to animals. If you find your enemy's ass fallen by the wayside, you have to help her home. I mean, that shows a compassion for your enemy as well as for the animal. But
Right.
the fact that the animals can't work on the Sabbath, they are included in the house. So a few things here and there, but that doesn't hold the animals in this kind of affection.
No, because none of that's all ethical. It's not affection, right? No, I mean, I think
Arm's length, an arm's length.
throughout the Bible that cruelty to animals is completely unacceptable, right? But the I think part of the reason why that's so clear is that animals are not conceived of as partners.
They have a use value, not a.
They have a use value, right? They are sentient creatures that humans use for food. So to be cruel to them, right, is not acceptable because they're that's going over the line.
And maybe against your own self-interest if you damaged your property.
Well, there is that, right? There is that, but I do think it's deeper than that. I do think it's deeper than just self-interest. I think there's a very, very profound ethical imperative not to harm living creatures, right? Killing is not harm, right? Killing is just a part of life, right? All forms of life kill other forms of life in order to survive. So that's not the issue, right? But animals, when they kill other animals, are not cruel about it, right? They just kill and eat, right?
But
So
does David or somebody, what do they do to the muscles of the horses? They damage the horses' hindquarters so they'd be lame.
right, but I think
Well, that's war. I mean, that's totally different.
A, that's war, and B, I think also it's immobilizing them. It's not necessarily killing them or torturing them. But I don't know. That's a good question.
Very painful.
That's a very good question. I'm not going to. But anyway, but the point.
This was very endearing. This
Right.
was something endearing in the middle of all this horrible stuff.
Exactly. That this man was so enamored of this ewe, right? And then this other man comes, who has sheep and goats and cows and anything he would want, right? He comes and takes this man's, right? And David, right? And Alter suggests, it's because David feels so guilty, right? That he wants to be the champion of the oppressed all of a sudden, right? I mean, I don't know that I completely buy it, but whatever. But he's like, doomed is this man, right? and he's going to pay back fourfold, and so on and so forth, right?
He doesn't have any insight. He doesn't recognize himself in this metaphor.
Exactly, and it sort of points right to the fact that if you've gotten so used to doing evil stuff, right, it's hard to recognize your own evil, right? And then to have it sort of demonstrated to you in such a dramatic fashion. So this is, I think, where we'll stop because it's 7:59. So we'll start on page 259. We'll read chapters 12 and maybe 30. I mean, this material is so dense. I don't feel like we should skim through it, because it's such a remarkable text. So anyway, all right. So thank you, Jeannie. If you see Dodie, you can let her know that she can look on YouTube and
Okay, that's great.
this discussion.
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna put this back on my finger.
There we go.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Everybody. All right. See you soon.
See ya.
Bye-bye.